Today, we're looking at Diamine's Woodland Green. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. And if you like videos like that, I would invite you to subscribe. You can also follow me on Instagram, and there's timestamps down below so that if you are in a hurry, you can skip around. But if you got the time, I'd appreciate you checking out the entire video. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into this Platinum 3776 with a broad nib, wrote with it for a day, and used it to take my notes for this video. I always standardize some of my writing samples by using Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper, although I do use more papers, and some of those will be seen later in the video. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shading. Now, the extra fine is a slightly lighter tone than the 1.1. The extra fine has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and it has plenty of really nice shading throughout. Like looking at the, starts very light and becomes very dark, quick. In the Q is dark on the left, light on the right, and then the word works its way darker. Same thing's happening in brown, so a lot of very nice shading within the writing itself. 11 seconds to dry. Now, medium is darker than the extra fine. Little bit lighter, just a hair lighter than the 1.1. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, nice shading throughout. Look at quick. The Q, it's dark on the left, light on the right, works its way darker all the way through. Brown is a very nice dark word. Over starts light, gets dark. The starts light, gets dark. Lazy starts dark and gets light. Very nice. 16 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both shows plenty of color variation, and we got plenty of color variation. Tomoe River. No bleeding. Normal Tomoe River ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shading. Now the extra fine is slightly, or quite a bit lighter than the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade in the writing itself. 18 seconds to dry. The medium is significantly darker than the extra fine and slightly darker than the 1.1. So we're seeing color variation here based on the nib and flow of the pen. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shading in the writing itself. 24 seconds to dry, which is not too bad on Tomoe River. The scrubby for both show us no color variation, and we got none. Rhodia paper gives no bleeding and no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade. The extra fine has a significantly lighter tone itself as its base tone than the 1.1. No feather, spread, halo, sheen, nice shading throughout the writing, as we've seen with the Q that's dark on the left, light on the right, works its way darker, gets lighter between the C and the K. Very nice stuff. Lazy starts dark and gets light. Over starts lighter and gets much darker. Nice in the writing. 13 seconds to dry. Not quite that camouflage shading that I love finding. Medium, significantly darker than the extra fine, about the same tone as the 1.1. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, but unlike the 1.1, there's a lot of shading in this writing. Look at over compared to dry. Over is significantly lighter than the word dry. Quick starts dark, gets light, gets dark again. Beautiful stuff. 17 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both shows plenty of color variation, and we got plenty of color variation in the writing itself. I agree with Vita that we can learn a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see is there is definitely more than one tone of green in here. It's a very, very light minty green that works its way into a much darker, bold green, and then this really, truly vivid blue all the way across the top. And it's those combinations that make the writing samples come up really alive. Now the one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And the very light minty green at the bottom, looks slightly darker than it did in the original chromatography. Other than that, and it not traveling as far up the filter paper, it largely looks the same. It makes me feel like this particular ink isn't going to have a whole lot of hold on to it. Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page and how hard it may be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, I'm immediately drawn to the lowercase h that is blown out and gone. I would not use this in a note-taking situation for fear of losing anything important. Now, when we look at the water, we do see that it's lifting all the darkest tones. It lifted the blue out of the way. It left that darker minty tone that we saw in the second chromatography, but it's not completely removing it, although I do slightly see the dots of the Rhodia dot pad coming through. Now, pen flush did everything water did and a bit more. You start to see right in the center part where some white of the paper is really starting to come through. It's very nice what's going on right there. I believe pen flush is all that's going to be needed to get this out of your pen. Now, a 1/3 bleach solution completely obliterated it off. The interesting thing is that the blue, when I dabbed it up, absolutely came out and showed, which is not what I was expecting looking at the chromatography, but it just means that when I dabbed it down, the blue was less susceptible. It took a little bit more time for the bleach to get a hold of. I test the viscosity or flow using a tilt test, which I'm going to link the video showing how I do that. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Diamine's Woodland Green has a viscosity of 1.53, making this a pretty wet ink. It's in that red area. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done on Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. I average all of those. Now, for the inks I've tested, I found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Diamine's Woodland Green has an average dry time of 17 seconds, making it not just normal, but average, which is pretty good considering how very wet this ink was. Instead of finding inks that look like Diamine's Woodland Green, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. And I was wanting a more dusty tone, and I was thinking of a magenta, which led me to Birmingham Pen Company's Fort Pitt Blockhouse Sepia. Now, I know it says sepia, which makes you think it's a brown ink, but this particular sepia is much more magenta. For the second writing sample, I used the White Lines notebook, Strathmore writing paper, and P. Berger. Here we're looking at White Lines paper, which is not a paper really meant for handling fountain pen ink, so the bleed through that we get is rather expected, and the amount of show through and ghosting that we get, again, really expected. So it's not the end of the world, but you can't use the back of the page. It would be a little too distracting for me, but it did not touch the page underneath. Now the 1.1 has no feathering, but it had lots of spread. It's thicker than the normal 1.1. It's about a 1.5. And I'm going to correct myself on the feathering. There was a lot of feathering on this ink. When we look at it, just look at the LA in Woodland, and we see there is a lot of feathering that's going on here. The word green is getting blown out on the back end, so I don't know why I said no feather when I wrote that down, because it's ridiculously feathered. No halo sheen, no shade. The extra fine is significantly lighter as a tone than the 1.1. The extra fine has no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shade, 2 seconds to dry. The medium is much darker than the extra fine, right about what we got with the 1.1. It has very, very minor feathering, and only in its thickest areas, like here on the K, there's really minor feathering that you really have to get in there to see, but I don't see it as a big problem. It does have, there's no spread, no halo sheen, no shade in the writing itself, only 4 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us no color variation. We didn't expect it, and we didn't get it. This is Strathmore writing paper. This is a nice laid paper, and it did pretty good. It's got no bleeding. It's not showing up on camera. It's got minor ghosting. Now, it wouldn't stop me from using the back of the page when I'm writing a letter to someone, but there is minor ghosting on this. Again, very minor. The 1.1 focus camera, there we go. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade. The extra fine is significantly lighter than the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade, 5 seconds to dry. The medium, much darker than the extra fine, but just a tad lighter than the 1.1. So we're getting 3 different tones depending on your nib and flow. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade, 9 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both, when you look far left to far right, looks like we should be getting color variation, but it's not showing up in the writing sample itself. Then this is P. Berger. It's a student grade paper, so all of this bleed through is not a problem unless you want to use the back of the paper, but it doesn't have any of the lines. The French rule that's on the front is not on the back. So it's really only meant to use one side. It did not touch the page underneath, allowing you to not have to worry about, losing paper, but you couldn't use the back if you wanted to. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade. The extra fine is significantly lighter than the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade, 3 seconds to dry. The medium is significantly darker than the extra fine, same tone as the 1.1. It has feathering all over it. The K is feathered all over. The OX in Fox is feathered all over. Lazy is feathered all the way through the word. 6 is feathered all over. The word dry is feathered all over. And I don't understand why in the medium, but not the 1.1, but there is a lot of feathering with the medium nib. Color variation happens by nib and flow choice. Medium took 6 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show no color variation. We didn't expect it and we didn't get it. And that is all that I have for the writing samples. So what do I think of Diamine's Woodland Green? This is a well-behaved, beautifully shading ink with very vivid tones. Very nice. So what pen is going to give you the best writing experience? Now you have to be careful not to have too wet a pen because it's going to drown out some of that shading and some of those great tones that this ink can give. However, if you want a very vivid green, a wet pen is really going to give it to you. I put out a new ink review every single day so that if you're not already subscribed, I'm going to remind you, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for watching.